I need to tell you about the 8 months I lived in a rental house on Colby Street, because I still don't have an explanation for what happened there, and I've stopped trying to find one. It was 2019. I'd just gone through a breakup and needed somewhere cheap, fast. The house was a single-story rancher, 3 bedrooms, way under market rent for the neighborhood. The landlord, an older man named Frank, showed me around in about 10 minutes flat. He seemed eager to get the lease signed. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I do now. The first 2 weeks were normal, boring even. I unpacked, I settled in, I told myself this was a fresh start. It was the 3rd week when I noticed the door. There's a hallway closet in the house, nothing special. Just a linen closet at the end of the hall near the 2nd bedroom. I don't use that room, so I hadn't opened the closet since move-in. One night I was doing laundry and went to grab a towel, and the closet door was open about 4 inches. I remember closing it. I remember it distinctly because the door sticks and you have to lift the handle slightly to latch it. I closed it again, lifted the handle, heard the click. The next morning, it was open again. I told myself I just didn't latch it properly. Old houses settle, doors swing, it's nothing. But over the next month, it kept happening. Always at night, always that same door. I started marking the frame with a pencil line so I'd know if it moved even a little. Every single morning, the line didn't match anymore. Around this time, I also started hearing something in the walls. Not rodents. I know what rodents sound like. I grew up in an old farmhouse. This was slower, almost rhythmic. Like knuckles dragging along drywall from the inside, moving from one end of the hallway to the other and then stopping. It happened maybe twice a week, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. I didn't tell anyone. I know how that sounds. You don't want to be the person who says, "I think my house is haunted." Especially not fresh off a breakup where people already think you're a little fragile. So I just adjusted. I stopped using that hallway at night. I started sleeping with a fan on for white noise. I told myself it was foundation settling, pipes, whatever. Then in October, I had a friend named Priya stay over for a weekend because her apartment was getting fumigated. I didn't say anything about the house. I wanted to see if she noticed anything on her own, honestly, because at that point, I half suspected I was losing it. Second night she stayed, I woke up around 2 a.m. to her standing in my bedroom doorway. Not saying anything, just standing there. I asked what was wrong, and she said very calmly, "Someone's walking in the hallway." I told her it was probably the house settling. She said, "It said something." I want to be clear. Priya is not a dramatic person. She's an ER nurse. She has seen genuinely terrible things and doesn't rattle easily. So when she told me, in a completely flat voice, that she heard a woman's voice from the hallway say a single word, my name, I believed her immediately, because I had never told her that word was already familiar to me. See, here's the part I hadn't told anyone. About a month before Priya's visit, I'd woken up gasping at 3 a.m. with the absolute certainty that someone had just said my name directly into my ear. Not shouted, whispered, close, like lips almost touching my ear. I chalked it up to a dream, a really bad one. I hadn't told a single living soul about it. Priya and I didn't sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, over coffee, shaking, I finally told her everything. The closet, the sounds in the wall, the whisper. She got very quiet and told me she wanted to look something up. 20 minutes later, she turned her laptop around. A local news archive. A woman named Diane Kessler had lived in that house in the late 1990s. She'd gone missing in 1998. The case was never solved. Her ex-boyfriend had been a suspect, but there was never enough evidence. The article had a photo of the house, same siding, same porch, before a renovation. Same house. I called Frank, the landlord, that same day, and asked him directly if anything had happened in the house. He got very quiet on the phone and then said, "That was before I owned it. I don't know anything about that," and hung up. He was renting it out from a family trust. I never got a straight answer from him again. I moved out 2 months later, in December. I told Frank I'd gotten a job offer out of state. That wasn't true. I just couldn't do it anymore. The closet, the knocking, and mostly the fact that whatever was in that house knew my name. I looked the case up again a few months ago. Still open. Still unsolved. Diane Kessler was 34 when she disappeared. She would be about 60 now, if she's alive anywhere at all. I don't know if it was her in that house. I don't know what it wanted, or why it said my name, or why the closet door kept opening on nights I hadn't even mentioned Diane out loud. I just know I don't go looking for cheap rentals with eager landlords anymore. And I never ever ignore a door that won't stay shut. Story 2. The Hitchhiker on Route 9. I used to drive long-haul routes for a regional freight company. Nothing glamorous, mostly overnight runs between distribution centers. If you've never done that kind of driving, you don't know what real isolation feels like. Hours of dark highway, a radio that only picks up static past a certain point, and just you and your headlights carving a tunnel through nothing. This happened on a stretch of 2-lane highway I'm going to call Route 9 because I still don't love saying the real name out loud, even years later. It was late November, maybe 1 a.m., temperature dropping into the 20s. I was hauling a trailer back to the depot, running a route I'd done probably 200 times. About 40 minutes from the nearest town, I saw someone on the shoulder. Now, you don't normally stop for hitchhikers on a night route. Company policy forbids it. And honestly, common sense forbids it too. But this was a kid. Looked maybe 16, 17. No jacket in November, on an empty highway at 1 in the morning. I wasn't going to leave a teenager out there to freeze. I pulled over, rolled the window down. He walked up slow, didn't say anything at first, just stood a few feet from the door, looking at me. I asked if he was okay, if he needed a ride into town. He nodded. Something about him felt off the second he got in, and it took me a few miles to place what it was. He wasn't cold. He'd been standing on an exposed highway shoulder with no jacket in freezing temperatures, and he wasn't shivering, wasn't rubbing his hands, nothing. He just sat very still, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I made small talk, asked his name. He said Danny. Asked where he was headed. He said, just to town. Asked what happened to his jacket, why he was out there. He didn't answer that one at all, just kept staring forward. About 10 minutes in, I started genuinely feeling uneasy, not because he did anything threatening, but because of how still he was. No fidgeting, no glancing at his phone, nothing, just this fixed forward stare. I glanced over at one point, and he was looking at me instead of the road, and his expression was just blank. Not scared, not friendly. Blank. I told him we were almost to town, tried to keep my voice normal. He said very quietly, "You should turn around." I asked why. He said, "Something's in the road up ahead. You need to turn around now." I'll be honest with you. Every instinct told me to slam the brakes and get him out of my truck right there. But we were in the middle of nowhere. It was freezing. And I still half thought this was just a scared, weird kid. So I said we were almost to town and kept driving. About a quarter mile later, my headlights caught something in the road. I want to be precise about what I saw. because I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times since. It was a shape, low to the ground, moving with a gait that wasn't right, not an animal's gait, not a person's either. Something in between, moving fast, diagonal across both lanes. I hit the brakes. Hard. The trailer fishtailed slightly on the cold asphalt. And in that half-second of chaos, I looked over, and the passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I would have heard it, felt the cabin pressure change, felt the cold rush in. It hadn't opened. He was just gone. I sat there in the middle of the empty highway, hazards on, hands shaking on the wheel, for probably 10 minutes before I could make myself drive again. Whatever had crossed the road ahead of me was gone too by the time I got moving. I never saw it clearly enough to describe it beyond wrong. That's the only word that's ever fit. I told one person about this at the time. My dispatcher, an older guy named Walt, who'd been driving that region for 30 years before he moved to dispatch. I expected him to laugh at me. He didn't. He got quiet, and then he said something I've never forgotten. Route 9's had riders on it longer than the companies had trucks. You did the right thing braking. Some folks who don't stop in time don't come back with a story to tell. I asked him what he meant by that. He wouldn't elaborate. Just told me to keep my radio charged and to never, under any circumstances, get out of the cab if I saw someone standing in that stretch of road at night. I drove that route for another 2 years after that night. I never picked up another hitchhiker again on Route 9 or anywhere else. And I still don't know what I saw cross that road, or where Danny went, or why he warned me at all. But I know I braked in time. And Walt's words stuck with me. Some people don't. Story 3. What we found in the basement. My husband and I bought our first house in 2021. Older place, built in the 1960s, in a quiet neighborhood outside a mid-sized town. The kind of place where nothing interesting is supposed to ever happen. We got it under asking price, which in that market should have been a red flag. But we were just excited to finally own something. The basement was unfinished when we moved in. Bare concrete, exposed joists, the usual. We planned to finish it eventually, put in a home office and a guest room. About 4 months after moving in, we finally started that project, which meant hiring a contractor to come assess the space and the older stonework foundation along the back wall. The contractor, a guy named Marcus, who'd worked in the area for over 20 years, was down there for maybe 15 minutes before he called us down to look at something. There was a section of the back wall, behind where a previous owner had built a shallow set of shelves that wasn't like the rest of the foundation. The original stonework was old fieldstone, uneven, the way foundations from that era usually are. But this one section, roughly door-sized, was poured concrete. Newer, smoother, clearly done at a different time than the rest of the house. Marcus said something that stuck with me. Someone didn't want you finding what's behind this. We debated for a few days whether to even touch it. Part of me wanted to leave it completely alone. Some things you just don't disturb. But my husband is an engineer, methodical, and he wanted to know if there was a structural reason for it, some old utility access or a filled-in coal chute from decades back. So we had Marcus open a small section, just enough to see through with a flashlight before committing to anything bigger. What was behind it was a room. Small, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet, clearly hand-dug and never intended to be part of the house's original footprint. No wiring, no plumbing, nothing structural about it at all. Just an empty dirt-floored space that someone, at some point, had deliberately sealed off with poured concrete. We called the county to check permit history and previous ownership before doing anything further, mostly out of caution. It took some digging, but we found that the house had been owned in the 1970s by a family whose name doesn't matter here, because what matters is what the retired local records clerk we eventually spoke to said when my husband mentioned the address. She remembered it, not fondly. She said there had been trouble at that house back then, involving a disappearance in the neighborhood that was never solved, and that a lot of longtime residents used to avoid walking past it after dark, though she didn't know any specifics and didn't want to speculate. We didn't get much more than that. No name matched to it, no confirmed connection to the room, nothing conclusive. Just an old woman's uneasy memory of a house that made people uncomfortable 50 years ago. And a hidden concrete room in our basement that had clearly been sealed for decades before we ever saw it. We had the room fully opened and inspected by the county before we did anything else with the space, out of an abundance of caution. There was nothing inside. No remains. Nothing of that nature. I want to be clear about that. It was empty dirt. But there were markings scratched into the underside of the old wooden shelf unit that had been built directly in front of the sealed section. Tally marks, dozens of them, cut deep into the wood, like someone had been counting something over what looked like a long stretch of time. Marcus, who has seen a lot of strange stuff in old houses over 2 decades of contracting work, told us flatly that, in his professional opinion, someone had used that space to keep something or someone for an extended period, and that whoever sealed the wall afterward did it in a hurry. We didn't finish the basement that year. We had the room filled in completely with new poured concrete, permitted and inspected, no gaps, nothing. My husband didn't want a home office down there anymore. Neither did I. We still live in the house. Most days, I don't think about it. But every so often, late at night, if I'm the last one awake, I find myself listening for something under the floor. I know there's nothing down there now. It's solid concrete, permitted, inspected, done properly. I just can't shake the feeling that whatever those tally marks were counting toward, it never got to finish.